dun do 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 da do 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 dee. Oh, hey, hey, oh,
Okay. Wow. Can I have another round of applause for that incredible film? I know we're all having a lot of feelings, so I'm really excited to introduce this incredible panel that we have to help us process what we just saw and talk a little bit more about what's going on. So it's my pleasure to bring back on screen our filmmaker Phyllis Ellis, who you heard from earlier. And joining Phyllis, we have some incredible folks from the movie. So Annette Negesa, the acclaimed Ugandan former middle distance runner. Yes, so thrilled to have Annette with us. We also have from the film Dr. Peyoshi Mitra. Yes, activist, advocate, badminton player, coach turned gender and sports scholar, and prominent athlete rights advocate. So can we just round of applause again for the amazing women in the film and Phyllis. From our Barnard ranks, we have Dr. Rebecca Jordan-Young, a socio-medical scientist who has worked against testosterone regulations of women athletes since 2012, often by dismantling the claims of scientific certainty and objectivity that are used to justify these rules. We also, from the Barnard ranks, have our moderator, Juliette McCure, BAC class of 92. Juliette is award-winning Sports of the Times columnist at the New York Times and a best-selling author. She joined the Times in 2004 as a feature writer and enterprise reporter in the sports department. In 2016, Juliette was named one of the top 10 sports columnists in the United States. So big round of applause for our panelists. And with that, Juliette, over to you. I will say we're gonna have some time for questions from the audience. So while these incredible folks are talking, start thinking about your questions, and we'll be able to take some questions from you in just a little bit. So Juliette, with that, take it away.
Thanks. Well, first of all, it's such an honor for me to be moderating this panel on such an important subject. From the film, you realize that this subject has been an issue in sports for, I'd say, more than 100 years, and it will be maybe an issue in the sports for the next 100 years. I'm not sure, but I've written about it a lot, and I really am excited to hear from each of our panelists about the issue and just why they've been interested in it and where they think it's going in the future. First of all, Phyllis, I wanted to ask you exactly what made you interested in this issue. I know that you're an athlete, former Olympian. If you could describe a little bit about why you've decided to dedicate so much time to make this important film.
I was very involved in sport politics. I was an athlete. I was also the vice chair of the Athletes Advisory Council for Canadian Olympic, at that time, association, involved in women's rights and athletes' rights at the time, 1,000 years ago. And I left sport abruptly. I was sexually assaulted, physically and psychologically abused as well, with so many of the other women that I competed with in many sports. So I left sport abruptly, and over the iterations of my life, landed back in art because I had started there, and thought that maybe one day I'd venture back. And then a very dear friend and mentor of mine, Dr. Bruce Kidd, who's a wonderful human and amazing feminist and athletes' right activist, Olympian. He's from Canada. I met him when I was 17. Introduced me to Peyoshi, and Mitra, Dr. Peyoshni Mitra, and Dr. Katrina Kazarkas. And from there, I knew Castor's story and had followed it, in 2009. And, sometimes what happens with movies or film projects is that, you just kind of keep following, and the story starts to speak back to you. And while, my lived experience, certainly from the global north and privilege and cis and the things that what I experienced pales to the stress and abuse and what the women in our film have endured. And I sort of thought at the beginning, like, I would have collapsed. Like, I thought I was so strong, but I would have collapsed under the pressure that these women have endured. And sometimes you follow a story, and 4 years later, here I'm sitting and talking to all of you. So it's that's kind of how I got started. And then Peyoshni and I became pen pals and phone pals, and she introduced me to the women.
Peyoshni and I actually know each other from years ago. I don't even know how many years ago, from the Duty Chan story. So I think Peyoshni knows everybody, everybody that has anything to do with sports or this issue. Why do you think the film? I would like everybody to address this and speak out if you have a feeling about it. But why do you think this film is so important, not only to sports but to just society in general right now?
Well, I'll just start. When you think of bodily autonomy and gender discrimination and racism and abuse of power, when we talk about things at a level, all of those things touch us all in different ways. But I think, and I think it's also important because, here in the global north, it's very, very important for us to stand in solidarity with things that are happening in women's issues around the world. That certainly really hit me. Was, as smart as I thought I was, or as aware, or as in touch, and so it's made me and connecting with other humans in my universe of sport and outside of sport. I don't think there's a person that watches the film, however, they're not, emotionally affected by it in some way.
I wonder, we're really I feel really lucky that we have Annette here. Such a heartbreaking story about what she had to go through just to play her sport. And Annette, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what sports meant to you when you were younger, and how that changed over time, how these policies have affected your life.
Yeah, first of all, I can say sports was something which was very important for me. It was part of my life, let me say, because I couldn't be there without sport. Because we were just connected together. As you see, when you're having the two hands and they remove one, the body won't balance. So by that time, as I said, sports was everything to me. It was making me to be able to get school, like education. It made me to get income. It made me to travel internationally for competition and also exposure. So, like when the regulations came in, like it finished up in, for me, it's like some part of life for me. It was already gone now.
You hadn't told your story. You were quiet about it for a long time. I wonder why it's important for you now, or why do you feel like now is the time to speak publicly about it and share your story? And how can it, why are you doing it, and how can it affect other people, knowing all the hardships that you've gone through?
Okay. At first, really, I didn't know what they were calling like athletes having high level of testosterone. And even when I went through all the challenges and all the difficulties which I faced, really, I didn't knew. I knew nothing about that. I didn't had enough information about that. And for almost 7 years since when I went for the operation, and for 7 years without taking any medication, not knowing that I have to take hormones in my body, until I met Dr. Parashni, and we had a talk. By that time, I didn't had anyone to talk to, like really talking to a person, what I feel really inside my heart. And from that time when I started talking to Dr. Parashni, is the time whereby I started growing up the guts of really understanding really which is behind the regulations from the IAAF, which are attacking the athletes who are with DSD. And from my knowing of coming in front talking about it, that I don't want also my fellow other young athletes who are there to go through all the challenges which I faced, all the harms. Because first of all, I grew up with both physically and mental torture, and also my body was like imbalance, like getting problems with my joints, my knees, and like my body also too. Yeah. So let me say that also my dignity was exploited, whereby like it was violated, let me say, because my dignity was gone and longer have it. Let me say everything went. And for me coming out talking about this issue is that really I want to spread the information, the message to other young female athletes who are there. Telling them that before taking up any other action, let them first get strong information, do much consultation to the people whom they know that really we can get some help from here before choosing up doing anything. Yeah.
Do you think there are other athletes who are struggling right now with the same issue that you went through, like not having anyone to talk to, just feeling like they have to do what the federations are mandating? Do you think that there are many other athletes out there who don't have a place to go if they need help?
That's true. There are very many athletes who are there, whereby like they don't have guts of coming out to talk about what they are going through. Yeah, because now they don't have any help. Even their federations are throwing them away. Whereby it's time whereby the federation has to come in to help them, to give them a hand. And they are struggling alone without anyone helping them. But like if they hear my message, I think someone can come in and consult from me because I know I have experience. I'll pass it through everything and I know really. Yes.
Payushni, you've helped now a number of athletes, or they seem to find you or come to you, or you come to them for these for help with these issues. Do you think there's a common theme between or among all these women who are coming forward with these problems with the federations? Like why are they being targeted? Or are they being targeted, I should say?
Yeah, about that, really, I can say that there is a racism and discrimination in the sport, whereby you're finding out that they're targeting all athletes from the global south and not going down on the ground, digging up how do these athletes coming up to be on the top level. They don't know how much these athletes puts in. They don't know how much these athletes sacrifice to reach on that level. whereby they come in and they bring harms to their bodies from these so-called AFF regulations.
Peyoshni and Beck, can you talk about that issue as well?
Yeah, thank you, Juliet, and really thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm in the airport, so you will hear a lot of noise in the background, and please tell me when you can't hear me at all, and I'll stop and mute myself. And I think Annette put it very strongly that all these athletes that we hear about today and those who we don't hear about have all worked very hard to get to where they are. And we tend to believe that testosterone, whatever the level is, gives them an advantage, and not really talk about the amount of sacrifice, amount of hard work that went into what they have achieved. Now, having said that, there are many athletes who haven't achieved, who haven't been in international circuit. There are athletes with innate variations in sex characteristics who are impacted by these regulations at a national level, but have never competed internationally or have hardly competed internationally. So it's also something that, a question once asked was, why was Caster Semenya winning against other women athletes who also had innate variations in sex characteristics? Why was it her all the time winning? Even if she was competing with someone like Margaret, for example, who you saw in this film, or Francine Niyonsaba, who has also done very well. So yes, I think this is an important point that Annette raised, and I wanted to re-emphasize it. Why these women are targeted? Well, we know, you just mentioned that both of us started talking in 2014 when Duti Chand went to Court of Arbitration for Sport. And since then, and even before that, we have always seen two things often sort of trigger investigation, trigger scrutiny. One is appearance, some kind of judgment of one person's appearance, and on the other hand, performance. Sudden, somebody doing well, performing well in a matter of short time, improving much, that kind of triggers investigation. But we have also seen in recent times, for example, in 800 meters, so I'm talking about middle distance races, particularly because those are now restricted events. And therefore you won't find any women with innate variations in sex characteristics in the middle distance races. But if you look at Hodgkinson, for example, from the UK, she's done phenomenally well within a few months and had a medal, I believe, in the World Championships and the Olympics as well. So, are we not talking about those women who are in global north countries from where we are used to seeing people being on the podium in these big events? When they compete and perform so well, why aren't we raising questions? And I'm not particularly, I gave you an example. I don't want any athlete to be questioned for nothing. And I think there is obviously that kind of, we have seen over and over again for decades now that women from the global south are being targeted, and we cannot avoid that. We cannot say that, no, that is not happening. That is, of course, happening. And if you look at, on the other hand, the medical commissions, they consist of people who are from Europe and mostly either Europe or North America. So we also need to see this. Who are regulating these bodies, and who are these athletes? There's a clear sort of, you will see it, how it looks. If you think of all the images of these medical commission members, for example.
Right.
How do you change?
If I could, Juliet, if I could actually jump in on this one, because this is something that I also just, I everything that Annette and Peyoshni said was exactly right. And I just would elaborate a little bit that, when you heard in the film from my research, my longtime research and writing partner, Katrina Karkazis. And when we were first doing field work on this issue for the 2012 Olympics, when the new rules were first it was the first Olympics where the rules had taken effect. And there was a scientific meeting right before the Olympic Games. There always is. And it was that year in Glasgow, Scotland. And Dr. Stefan Berman gave the scientific presentation that was meant to lay out the rationale for this rule. And in that presentation, the racial ideology, the racist ideology, was absolutely explicit. He said in that presentation, why is this a problem in athletics, meaning track and field? Well, it's because athletics is not just the Caucasian sports. It is a whole world sports. He literally said that. He went on to talk about women from Africa and South Asia coming out of nowhere. He spoke very explicitly about the idea that these are athletes who didn't have to work as hard, didn't struggle and sacrifice, and the absolute saturation of racist ideas about who is a natural athlete as opposed to who must work and struggle and sacrifice. And we could go on, but I want to be clear that this is not just implicit. This is very explicit, and it has been from the beginning. It's there in terms of who gets targeted, but it's also when you listen and you read and look at what they're presenting and writing and slides, it's absolutely explicit. And I would say one other last thing about what triggers. I think it's important to recognize performance triggers, as Payoshni said, appearance, like somebody's judgment of who looks masculine, but gestures as well. If somebody performs, they're like, they do gestures. One of the things, Castor has incredible confidence and does some gestures like this that men athletes usually do. And the reason is because women athletes are constantly afraid of being targeted. So there are ways in which the most subtle things that are about how people perform gender get read as something about their bodies, and it's and that pulls some people into the policing, but not everybody.
I just wanted to add, you mentioned Stefan Berman. So that was 2012. So in 2019, I was in Washington. It was a very small group. I couldn't shoot. They wouldn't let me, but they let me in. Probably a mistake, but they let me in. And he said, and I quote, to my recollection, although I've got it written down in my book right there, I don't understand why these biological men wouldn't want to change their appearance. I mean, I don't understand. Why wouldn't they just want to take the medication? Why wouldn't they just want to have, do something to medically alter themselves? He point blank called the women under the regulation biological men, and it was actually quite shocking. So that was how many ever years later after you in 20. So this was just like in the fall of 2019.
Right.
Beck or anyone else, how do you think testosterone became the issue here? I mean, over the years they tried different
Right.
standards or different ways to sort of define who fits in their definition of a box of who's a woman who can compete in these sports. How did we end up at testosterone? And I know you've written a book about it. So
Right.
or how we got to this point.
Right. Well, I think, if you look in at this moment in a lot of sciences broadly, unfortunately, the way in which popular misconceptions about hormones are also present within certain branches of science, especially medical science and sports sciences. There's a lot of misconception in our book, the book I wrote with Katrina. we talk about how folklore about hormones as being themselves gendered and having a sex and belonging to one sex or the other is a very, very strong ideology, even though we know that's not the case. Hormones aren't simple, they don't work that way. But the ideas about hormones are very black and white, very binary, male versus female. So that's one part of it, that testosterone has this, it's been given a persona as male and masculine, even though that's not accurate. We all need testosterone. We all use it. If we actually need a little testosterone to ovulate, there are surprising facts. That's one thing. But the other big thing is that what they first had landed on, the so-called sex chromosomes, really got the sports federations and the Olympics in very hot water when with Maria Jose Patino, right? She had sued and took them to court, won her case around the fact that she had XY chromosomes, but had an androgen insensitivity. And so according to their thinking, her body wasn't responding to testosterone, so she shouldn't be closed out of the female category. There's a way in which the way that that particular case was argued and the way in which that case got taken up, that sort of set the stage, in my view, for saying, okay, it's testosterone. This will be our next thing. I mean, there's a long-standing obsession with trying to find something in the body that would allow them to draw a bright line. There is no single thing. Sex is complicated, so you can't do that. But the earlier absolute tragic errors that they made around the so-called sex chromosomes, I think, led them together with hormone folklore to think, we can do this. But from the beginning, I mean, it was obvious that, in fact, so many women whose bodies are completely insensitive to testosterone are actually overrepresented in elite sport, not underrepresented. If they had paid any attention to what they already knew, this testosterone rule makes no sense whatsoever. It's just one of so many factors. But I don't know, Peyoshni or Annette, I don't know whether you have different ideas about why testosterone.
Peyoshni?
Sorry. I wanted, as Beck was speaking about, about Maria Patino, and it reminds me of a comment that was made by Professor Aine Jongfist during Duti Chand's case, Juliet. He was while he was answering a question from the judges, and this is in the judgment, so I can freely talk about it. He said that this is a history, the history of sex testing is a history of ignorance. And I think it was such an important thing coming from somebody who has been part of these medical commissions for more than 25 years, having headed the IOC Medical Commission for several years, and accepting that this was a history of ignorance. Every time they have come up with a regulation, they found that something is not working out. So they had to come up with another set. If you think about Maria, if you think about Duti Chand, every time they're reworking their regulations. But what we need to understand, and what this film I think very beautifully talks about, very powerfully talks about, is what the people who are being harmed in between. So 2011 was hyperandrogenism regulations, and we challenged that in 2014. We get a result, and the hyperandrogenism regulations were banned in 2015. But between 2011 and 2014, Annette, experiences, all the scrutiny, all the harm from 2011. She was in world championships. For 2012, she stopped from going to London, and then she undergoes first of all investigation in France, and then the surgery in Uganda, following which there was no kind of medical support, hormone therapy that was provided to her. Now, this huge sort of harm that took place, and she's one person that we are listening to because she has decided to talk about it. There's several others we don't know of who were impacted during that period while they were deciding that the hyperandrogenism regulations were correct or not. While they thought this is the best possible science we have, but best possible is not good enough when you are violating human rights. You cannot have even one athlete impacted if you don't have clear science, and they don't have clear science. And all of us know by now, the way scientists are arguing against each other, that there could never be clear science. So allow them to compete.
Yeah, Annette, I wanted to ask you, just about the mental health issue, about every woman that in the history of the Olympic movement almost who has had to whether it's have a verification card that you're feminine or all these other iterations of testing that they've had. How hard is it to be a woman in sports, and how hard is it to have to go through all of this all these consequences of these regulations? And I want to know why men don't have to do any of that either. I mean, it's hard enough for women to compete in sports, especially in some countries that don't have enough finances, like America. I wonder how difficult it is to be a woman in sports who has to deal with these regulations on top of everything else.
Yeah, first of all, it's really very hard. Like me, an athlete from the global south, let me say, for example, coming up, becoming a good athlete, being in a community whereby we don't have enough equipment, which matches like to those from the Western countries, I think you can pick up what I'm saying. It means a lot. If someone to put in everything, to sacrifice. Where I can say like someone having a dream, something to achieve, adjust it towards some few minutes or some few, let me say, hours, and that person comes and takes away someone's dream from nowhere. I can give you, I think, some example to know really what that person feels when they have snatched your dream from you in your hand. So it was a time of many challenges. First of all, the concentration in the mind. I was still thinking about what you have been prepared for a long period of time. You have sacrificed everything. You have put it in time. You have done all sorts of training programs. You have faced several injuries.
Yeah, Annette, so it's must be so difficult to be where you are, and I know that the audience might have some questions for you or for the other panelists. I'm not sure what the okay, so,
right. So we can thank you so much. Yeah, we can I'm here just to facilitate a couple of questions from the audience. We have time for about 1 or 2 questions. If you have a question you'd like to ask our panelists, raise your hand and someone will run a mic to you to make sure that they can hear you. I know Julia could keep going with their questions, but we wanted to give time for anyone here to ask something that they'd like to ask. Yes, we got a question right here.
Thank you for the film to bring light to this very important issue. And what can we do beyond being aware? What can we do to help push this fight forward?
Hey, Oshna, you want to start with the answer?
Everyone's pointing. I can see Phyllis pointing at me, even virtually.
Well, you've been in this fight for a long time, so you have. I mean, every one of you have. So we'll start with you, and if you could, yeah, it's a great question.
I think I will leave my email with you, and we can have a longer discussion on how you can help this. Of course, we need to we can't be just few people talking about it. I think this film is reaching out to a lot of reaching out to a lot of people everywhere in the world, which is great. There have been, in New York Times, Juliet, you had written many years back in 2014 that article when we were fighting for Diti Chand. There are these media reports, films, which are helping us for sure, but there are still many athletes which we haven't been able to reach. And as I am talking to you, it's not only a thing about athletics, it's a thing about other sports as well. As I'm talking to you, I'm dealing with other sport persons outside track and field. And I must add here that Annette Negesa is it has been a huge support speaking to many of these athletes because, no one can understand them better than Annette does. So she's been always a huge support in all these cases that I'm currently dealing with in other sport. So it is not only about track and field, it is also about, for example, football. FIFA has a very outdated regulations, which they have been trying to review and to come up with a new set of regulations for a long time. You will be aware that the IOC framework has been now, sort of out, and it does emphasize the concepts that this film raises: bodily autonomy, no presumption of advantage, no harm. All these very important things which have always been ignored by sport authorities for so long. But having said that, I think we need to make more noise. We need to really push these authorities to be accountable so that not a single athlete is impacted negatively. People come to sport either because they love sport, because sport can give them sport can provide lots of opportunities, especially in the global south. And then you experience something so negative. If you really want girls and women to come forward and play sport and enjoy sport and feel safe in sport, then it's so important that we make these authorities accountable. So how can we make these authorities accountable? We can write letters. Anyone can start a letter any day. You can reach out to one of us. We always struggle for resources. And I will encourage the organizers to share my email with you. I can't see you from here, but I encourage that you connect with us. Thank you.
I'll add one very quick thing, if I may, which is find out what's going on for you locally, in your state, in your town.
Okay, I think we might have lost Beck, but we will try and get her back. We have time for one more question. We have one. Can we get a mic down here?
Hello. Thank you for bringing attention to this issue. My question is more, I guess, like a collaborative idea as ways to educate on this issue and also share this movie. I happen to know that East Tennessee State University is considered an athletic or an Olympic training site for athletes, including within their women's soccer department. A lot of their women's soccer players are trained and then go on to soccer teams for national teams and play as needed. Have you ever considered using this movie as an educational source within schools like that to educate young female athletes that are really in an Olympic training site and might have to face issues like this?
Yes. I think that whole process is just starting. There've been a lot of universities in Canada that have already have their film in their library, just because we have many connections here, and I know that they're starting that process in the United States now, and most importantly is to get the film and into to the Southern Hemisphere and the global South so that athletes can see. But we are having an International Women's Day a virtual, global screening for Olympic athletes, coaches. And it's a 24-hour virtual hub, so that as many people can see the film in that space that are closely attached to the subject matter, and that it's important for them to see it. And then we hope to take it globally. So if you wanted to tweet out that you liked it, it just is amazing how, or whatever the words are, social media it out. Hashtag, I don't know what it's called, hashtag category woman film, doc film. But it's just had a really amazing response. And I think it's because the women, especially Annette, is being so open and frank and honest about what she's been through. It was interesting too. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were saying, even though their daughter is othered, she's like 6 feet tall, and she's 13 years old, and I think she's Persian, and she is a really great athlete. And they asked me, would you come and talk to her, because she's being bullied and othered for her difference in her sport community at the public school. Like, you could throw a baseball to the school. So I sent the principal of the school the film, and they've said, even though, so they're going to show it to the grade 7 and 8 class, just like where my kids went to school, actually. So it's about saying no, and giving athletes the power to say no, educating, especially young women and women identified athletes in this sort of general safe space. Payoshni said it too. They talk about protecting women's sport. She said, and I really hit with me, women don't need protection. We're feminists. We don't need to be protected, but what we do demand is a safe place to compete. It chokes me up.
Okay, I think with that, we have to wrap. Thank you so much. Please, again, another round of applause for our incredible panelists. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great afternoon, everybody. Take care.